Awareness. Yes, let's talk about the limits of awareness. Being that we discussed awareness in the previous episode, let's talk about the limits of awareness because there are limits to it. But here's the beauty the beauty is your limits of awareness are pretty incredible at the end of the day. So, awareness feels like it should just be expanding forever. And in my previous episode, I was like, yeah, you need to think bigger, think larger. And that is true, but there are limits to our awareness. Now, let's go over it because awareness feels like it should be expanding forever, but it doesn't. It doesn't do that at all. Now, I think what's important for you to understand is that your brain can only handle so much at once. So this has a lot to do with like what they call, cognitive overload, as like some people talk about. But your brain can only handle so much at once. So when you are thinking really large, you are going to have to chunk something all the way down and execute that one small thing. That's where the brain takes in a lot. So your brain takes in a lot of information, the sights, the sounds, the thoughts, and of course what your body's telling you. And quite honestly, because we're so hooked into the distraction culture, we're actually distracting each other and we're distracting through social media, then what's happening is we can only focus on small amounts. So this is one of the reasons why I myself do a lot of things to work on my own attention span, including meditation and breath work and concentration grids, focus grids as well. So your brain takes in information. It takes in the thoughts, the sights, the sounds, and what your emotions are actually trying to tell you. So you can only fully focus on a small amount of what's going on. So if you're overwhelmed, that's another thing to consider. People get overwhelmed very easily, especially nowadays when our brains are being loaded with so much information. But awareness becomes that spotlight. It's not the full coverage, it doesn't expand everything, but it's based on where you put your attention, which is really crucial. So the limit is you cannot be aware of everything at the same time. That's what is really important for you to understand. But if you do understand that if you open up your awareness, you could see possibilities that you actually didn't see before. So when we deal with this whole concept, we are dealing with attention span, which of course, having a background in cyber psychology, I'll be the first person to tell you that our attention spans have become shorter in the past 30 years. Attention is smaller now by literal design, by design. Only one main focus at a time for people. Your phone versus your surroundings, which could make or break your safety in the middle of New York City in a difficult area. Your emotions, what's going on inside you versus what's happening outside of you, the internal awareness versus the external awareness, and the future versus now. That's where the anxiety starts to kick in, is that the mind might wander into the future and not really focus on what they actually can do today. So you can switch your focus. That's the power that you actually have, but you can't hold it all at once. You can't hold everything all at once. You got to be able to focus on one thing that will reduce your awareness of the other things. So it's not a problem to look at the big picture and ask a lot of large picture questions, big choice questions. You can do that, but it's also important to narrow it down and be like, all right, what's the very first thing I need to do? So this is all about the overwhelm to the execution. Focusing on one thing will reduce your awareness of other things. So it's good for you to look at the big picture first and start breaking things down to their common denominator and say, okay, which one should I decide on now, and start deciding. Make a decision to start somewhere. Your emotion will change with what you actually notice. So your mood becomes part of that filter I discussed in the previous episode. If you're stressed, you're just going to notice problems. You're going to notice issues. If you're angry, you will notice blame. You will finger point towards other people. But if you're calm, you can actually notice your options that's available. If you're hopeful and expansive, you'll start to notice what is actually possible. Same situation, totally different interpretation. You see reality through your emotions, but it's not directly. It's through the lens of your emotions. Now, habits are a big deal. I always say it's not that you have a pattern, you are your pattern, and the habits run on autopilot. So your brain prefers familiar. But if you choose familiar over what's possible, you could be limiting your actual life. So you got to consider that as an important point. So you might look at familiar patterns and maybe look at familiar choices, but you're not expanding yourself to what's possible in your life. So what do? You wind up repeating your old thoughts, old reactions, and old assumptions. It'll save you time. It'll become part of your mental schema, mental recipe. It'll shortcut parts of life, but it will totally make your experiences smaller. And it's up to us to live experientially. If we live experientially and we go and have an experience, we gain something. And most people want to avoid pain. So what they try to do is they try to play this mental chess game as to how they can avoid certain things in their life. They avoid the pain, they go towards the pleasure, not realizing that maybe what might seem painful may not be, right? Or what may seem difficult may actually wind up being easier when you start to realize there's information that can support you on your journey. So you miss new options, you miss new opportunities because you're running old patterns automatically. We have to consider that your past will actually shape the present as well. So if you compare everything to your past experience all the time, you're using past mental references, and your mental recipe in your head is going to start looking at the past. So you start to compare that, and the past things that have happened will just shape and mold the meaning that you have now. And you'll have expectations. And this is where your brain will fill in the blank. So if you do something that is aimed towards the future and you have a mental expectation in your head, your brain will try to fill in the blank and say, oh, well, if I do this, that's going to happen. Not realizing it's being predictive in the moment, and you yourself, it may not go down that way. You may not even realize, it didn't really happen the way I thought it would. So you rarely see things that are fresh. And that's important for you to understand. You may not see it as fresh. Now, our identity and who we are is a very big deal. And everyone has a blind spot in life, an area of life that they don't see. And everyone has an aversion, something they push away and they want to make it get away from them. So in terms of blind spots, it's areas of life we don't see. When we expand our awareness, we start to go beyond that blind spot. When you start to embrace those blind spots, you can have a different life altogether. So you have a built-in idea of who you actually are, but you might ignore any evidence that's contradictory. Or there's options that you'll reject because they don't match your schema. They don't match your mental recipe that you have in your head. So your self-image and what you believe is possible actually totally can block things from going down, and you will block things that don't fit your identity. You'll say, that's not me, that doesn't go with who I am. So you'll just block it altogether, not realizing that you could actually grow. People stay in their comfort zone. So your self-image will block what doesn't fit who you think you are. It's really obvious. People won't choose certain options because I won't give my money to that, or I won't do this, or that means I'll be this type of person. If I go and start a business, that means I'll be part of the wealthy, and the wealthy are evil. And so your identity creates all those blind spots, and you cut off what is possible, all because it will suit your identity in some way, shape, or form. Now, we are in an information age, and what's happening is we're going on 7 podcasts, 7 YouTubes, 7 articles on Medium, 7 videos on Instagram. Too much information reduces your ability to see things clearly. So we're in an information age where people are getting overwhelmed by the amount of information. But your brain is the type of brain where it can simplify and just cut to the chase. We have a mental recipe, a mental schema. But what your brain will do is it'll pick one explanation and ignore the rest. It'll say, okay, I'm not doing this. Why? Well, this is my explanation for it, because people like this do it, and I don't want to be a part of that. It's connected to my identity. So they ignore the rest. You ignore all the other options, even though those options could change your life entirely. So more information can totally, absolutely reduce your ability to have strong awareness. And that is what is happening in this world right now. People's awareness is completely shut down by social media overwhelm, information overwhelm. Unless, of course, they master themselves and start to learn to focus on what truly matters. And we reduce our distractions to the best of our ability. So what is awareness in the whole thing? Well, first of all, if we look at awareness, it's not full perception of everything. Okay? It's shifting your attention. And your attention moves around, your focus moves around. It's that little flashlight on things. And sometimes, if you've ever seen certain flashlights where the flashlight is one small circle, and then when you adjust it, it widens the light. And that is what you can do. That analogy is perfect, because once you widen that light, it can be overwhelming because you're seeing more, but then you actually see more choices. It's like looking through the keyhole of a door. You only see a little bit, but once you open the door, you see everything. It is based on your attention. It's based on your emotions. It's based on your memory references and your mental recipe you have in your head. And it is based on your identity as well. So at the end of the day, this final ending of the episode here is that big awareness doesn't mean seeing everything. You want to do your best to ask questions to allow you to understand more, see more, and comprehend more. But also, if you get overwhelmed, start chunking things down, start breaking them down. The big awareness means noticing more options than your default way of thinking will actually allow. Let me say that again. If you didn't get it, laugh now and figure it out later. But here's the deal. It's about noticing more options than your default way of thinking actually allows. So your awareness can expand like that flashlight, going from a thin beam of light to a wide beam. But it always has limits because the brain is very selective by design. Very important. So what I like to say is, if you do widen that beam of light and you see the whole big picture and you ask big questions, start getting on paper and chunking things down to the lowest possible denominator. Once you understand the big picture, start going small in terms of execution. All right, what's the smallest common denominator that will take me through this big picture? And go from there. Don't be afraid to explore. Get curious. Be the child again. Have a great day. Take care. Don't forget to click the link below. Mario Leone, Voices of Victory channel, signing off.